So we are now joined by our Chief Constable, Rachel Swan, to answer some of your questions. But before we get into the questions that you've provided, we touched earlier on with Michelle around the global figures, the national figures, and just how stark and frightening this is. 2.7 days, a woman is killed in the UK. I mean, what do you think? What more can be done?
Well, I think for me, the key lies in greater partnership working and a whole system approach to it, because obviously we deal with the hard edge of it, as in we deal with investigating the crime, and we have we do a lot of stuff in prevention, but I think there is so much more in that, because we're the other side of it, and I would really like to see wider system approach to, and I know there's work that's been done nationally on this, because it's everybody's responsibility to try to change that for generations going forward, in terms of change the attitudes towards women, change the attitudes towards violence against women and girls, so that it is not seen as permissible, so that domestic violence is not seen as permissible or something that's accepted. And police alone can't do that by simply enforcing out. There's a whole, Michelle touched on some of this, but, some of the education pieces that go forward, some of the perpetrator programs even, to try to prevent all of that cycle, because we'd all want to prevent it happening in the first place.
Yeah, and I agree with you completely, because even looking at serious violence and then looking at working with social media companies as well, that influence around violence as well, outside of violence against women and girls, knife crime and the serious violence that we're seeing in communities, how do we police platforms that we don't control? How do we do that?
Excuse me, no, absolutely. And I know there's a lot of work that goes on nationally. And I know you have a role with that with the PCCs,
yes,
around greater responsibility with companies to prohibit certain things being seen and be available, because reducing its exposure is a way of as a way of prevention. And so there is a bit in terms of working with all of those companies to make those spaces safer, because obviously we try to do everything we can in a public space and safe space, but actually there's the online space that we need to make safer as well. But that, again, that's a wide, there's only so many things the police can do, and we will do them and do them robustly, but actually it needs a much wider approach.
No, I agree completely. I mean, I have my own questions, but today isn't about my questions. Today is about the public's question. And I will start with a member of the public from Amber Valley, who's talking a bit around increased violence, and I'll read the questions as they're written.
Sure.
So, although potentially not currently considered serious violence, the upsurge in violence, aggravated and destructive shoplifting in broad daylight must surely be expected to lead to violence against shop staff and owners as they try to protect and retain their property. What steps can the police take to stop this crime and empower shop staff to intervene?
Okay, so absolutely right. Shop theft has seen a tremendous increase over the last couple of years. If I just look in terms of ourselves, even though it's been steadily increasing, the last 12 months it's up by 6%, which is a huge increase compared to a few years ago. And we take positive action to deal with that, to deal with both the offenders who commit retail crime and also in particular those who use or threaten violence in order to commit that crime. We have a very positive outcome rate in terms of those that we convict for shop theft, and this includes if it's aggravated. So last month we were up to a 37% outcome rate, which is really high and puts us in a really good place nationally as well in terms of that. We don't just use, though, the criminal powers that are available to deal with. We deal with things like civil orders and work in partnership with the city and community safety partnerships and the local councils and the county council to target those who are causing the disruption. Because I kind of come back a bit to what I said earlier around prevention. So, if someone's done it once, we want to prevent a repeat offending, and we want to prevent locations becoming vulnerable to that type of behaviour. I think the question was specifically asking around what people would do, and my advice would always be to call 999. If it's an emergency and there's a threat of immediate violence, we don't want people to feel that they have to step in. They should call us, in that emergency. But we also, there are a number of things that retailers do in terms of prevention and methods to prevent such behaviour and try to prevent, that crime happening within and helping to bring offenders to justice. And there's a National Business Crime Centre as well that will offer a wealth of advice for anyone who may own a shop or premises and they want additional information. It is out there and can be supported.
Okay. No, thank you.
Hold on.
So in regards to officers, another member of the public from Amber Valley asked, what is the local police force doing about excluding police officers who engage in sexist, sexual harassment, so sexist behaviour, sexual harassment and use of sexist language?
Yeah, and obviously this is a very current topic, I think, in terms of culture in policing and standards of behaviour in policing, because obviously there is no other choice. You have a police force and there isn't an alternative provider in that. So people want to be really reassured that our standards of behaviour are high and we work really hard to maintain those standards of behaviour, which I can tell you we absolutely do. We've made a public commitment to being anti-discriminatory, but that's followed up and supported by an awful lot of work that we've done over the last couple of years. So it is unacceptable for officers and staff to engage in sexist behaviour, racist behaviour, homophobic behaviour, any sort of language around that, and certainly includes behaviours associated with it. We provide training and guidance for all officers and staff, very specific in terms of standards and standards of behaviour with each other and with the public, and that's supported by the Code of Ethics, which is standards of professional behaviour, which is something that all police officers and staff must abide by. We've also done some very specific work in force where we've done what we call line in the sand inputs, so that people understand where that standard behaviour lies, and they can get a real sense of what they should or shouldn't do within this particular situation. We also support a number of confidential reporting mechanisms for both the public and members of the staff to report things to us if they see behaviour that they think falls below their standards. But where there is something which is a significant breach of behaviour, we tackle it really robustly, and there are people who are no longer within the organisation for serious elements of that type of behaviour.
And I can understand why residents may actually raise this as a question, because sometimes, we've seen nationally incidences where behaviour has been questioned and questionable, and we've seen officers removed from posts for that sort of behaviour. But I think it's also reassuring for residents to know that these are conversations that we have when we meet regularly to ensure that we're looking at recruitment and retention and making sure that, as you say, that there are robust procedures in place to keep the public safe and to hold that standard. But what would you say to residents who have lost trust? Yeah.
I mean, so there are a few things. I guess I also would want to give residents some reassurance that we take a victim-centred approach. So if a member of staff reports on another member of staff, for example, or a member of public, we make sure we treat that person as a victim and make sure there is welfare support around them, because we appreciate how hard it is to either speak out about a colleague or again speak out around police who might be seen simply due to the office that they hold in terms of position of authority. So there's some reassurance around what we do there. We also publish the results. So when an officer has been dismissed or a member of staff has been dismissed, we're very keen that there is real transparency in terms of what we do, in terms of to recognise how we take it so seriously. So it's normally held, members of the public can come, sometimes press report when we have gross misconduct panels, and we report it within the press so that people can see this happened and this is what we did, because I think it's really important that people can actually see we do. It's all very well me sitting here and saying, yes, we take it really seriously, but people need to see the proof that actually we are doing what we say we're committed to doing.
Yes, thank you for that. So our next question is from a resident in South Derbyshire. This is in regards to violence against women and girls, but this resident has said, what about violence on men?
Okay, so I would want to reassure people that violence can be committed against anyone. It is men, women, boys, girls, however people identify, violence can be committed against that person, and we treat it just as seriously no matter who it is committed against. Of course there is an emphasis on VAWG, because the vast majority of people in domestic violence settings, for example, are women. The vast majority of rape and serious sex offences are women, but not all. Men can be, and boys can be victims too, and we recognise that. And I've said before, we have a victim-centred approach when people report things to us, but actually that's how we deal with the crimes now, victim-centred and focusing on catching the perpetrator. Doesn't matter what sex that person is.
Yeah. No, and it is really important for this question to have been raised as well, because we want that for residents to be aware that this is something that's important across the board. And if you are a victim or you are a survivor, we really, really encourage people to get in touch with the police, get in touch with Derbyshire Victim Services if you do need support. And it is a priority for both my office and the constabulary. We have another question from a resident in High Peak. I want to know whether you intend to give community leaders a single point of contact to raise concerns over the safety of women and girls, particularly school children, brought to them by the communities they represent.
So, as I said earlier, if it's a matter that is a particular urgency, people should always dial 999. Any emergency, anything that needs an urgent response, 999 straight into our control room is the normal route to go through. Or if it's considered less urgent, I'd always say 101 or online. All communities do actually have a focal point of contact because they have a neighbourhood policing officer. And our named neighbourhood policing officers are always more than willing to speak to people and to be that point of contact. But again, I come back to, they might not be on duty if you've got one single person. That's why you've always got to think about the 999 and the 101 and the online. But if it's not something that is an immediate risk, then the neighbourhood policing team, absolutely to be that first point of contact. And community leaders are always really encouraged to link in with that neighbourhood policing officer because they're the ones responsible for understanding what's happening within the community, what are the concerns within the community, and then, we look at, as you and I have spoken about before, we look at problem-solving plans to tackle some of the issues and give reassurance to the local community within that area.
So if I was a community leader and didn't know who my named neighbourhood officer is, and thinking about the government's ambitions on the neighbourhood guarantee and having a named officer in PCSO, what's the best way to find out who that person would be? Would that be to ring 101? How would you suggest?
Yeah, I would say if you can, to go online, because if you type in Derbyshire Police and then it goes through the single online home portal, and you'll be able to see in Derbyshire Police, and you can type in who, your local postcode and see who your local policing team are.
Okay. No, thank you for that. We have another question from South Derbyshire. I am keen to know what steps are either in place already or planned to ascertain the extent, if any, of grooming gangs in relevant local authorities.
Okay, yes. And I understand, given what's been in the news recently, why there might be some concerns about residents related to this. So we have a dedicated child sexual exploitation team, which I'll call for the purposes of the CSE team, and they sit under the Serious and Organised Crime Department, and they're led by a detective inspector and a detective sergeant, and they deal with all the CSE offences that come in, and they work with our partners in the city and county, with the primary aim of identifying children who are at risk of criminal exploitation or exploitation in some manner, and they work proactively to find those children and safeguard those children and to deal with the perpetrators. Frontline officers as well are trained to spot the signs of exploitation and then how to deal with it in the initial stages before that team of experts can come together. But as I say, it's very much a partnership approach, because obviously we can deal with certain bits of it, the crime, but actually safeguarding, for example, would sit within our city and county partners. The issue that I think is being raised is the concerns around grooming gangs, as they've been known as. And these are, in essence, group-based CSE, child sexual exploitation or criminal exploitation. And the gangs is known as, it's two or more people that are known to each other or associate with each other, and group-based offences is how we would term it. So we've recently done what we would call a CSE profile, which is where we look at the intelligence and information we have to try to ascertain what's the threat and risk we have across the county, where is it, etc. And the latest one demonstrated that there were 9 group-based offences, and just so I get this right, of those 9, 5 had familial links, i.e. the perpetrators were family members and not linked to any sort of gang, and none of them were linked to organised crime gangs. So you can see they were connected to each other, 2 or more people, but actually not a gang as in, what's been reported in terms of grooming gangs. One of the offences we did have, though, was a historical offence relating back to the 1990s, which, although not related to an organised crime group, did relate to grooming by a number of men, some of which who were known to each other. So we're now investigating that historic event with a senior investigative officer in charge of that. And of the data, in terms of the offences reported, 78% of the victims were female, 22% were male, and 75% of the perpetrators were male, with 25% female.
So in terms of the work that's being done in this space, does that sit solely with Derbyshire Constabulary, or do we do a lot of work, I guess, cross-county?
Yes. So quite clearly, we have CSE teams, as do other forces, and we work very well together in terms of sharing information because people may travel, people have been, they don't. Criminality doesn't stick to a force area. Added to which, we have the Regional Organised Crime Unit who support us, who sit across the 5 forces in the East Midlands who support us. But, some reassurance, we would absolutely be liaising with our other force colleagues to share information, to identify, those people who would be vulnerable to this and try to safeguard them and to tackle the perpetrators.
Okay. We have another question here from a resident in High Peak. How can you guarantee that women and girls are safe in the current climate of crime perpetrated against women from men who have gone under the radar?
Yeah, so I think Michelle touched a bit on this in terms of encouraging reporting. That's the first thing, because you're right, under the radar means it's not known. And it's not known by somebody, but somebody is suffering as a result of that criminality or that perpetrator. So we do an awful lot to encourage people to report things to us, because if we know about it, then we can work with partners and to do something to it. As has been said many times, violence against women and girls is a priority for us. So, we have an awful lot in terms of what we know about what's happening within the county. And it is something that, whilst I would always want to see a reduction in crime, for me, I don't think we're at the right level in terms of is everybody who's a victim of that type of crime reporting it to us? Because if they're not, there's still more crimes to report. So it's not one that I am ever concerned about if it continues to rise, because I think that must demonstrate that people are still reporting it to us.
Yes.
And it's not hidden, as as this person said, or under the radar. So we do an awful lot of work in terms of encouraging reporting. We've produced education materials so that people can spot what is coercive behaviour, because that's sometimes what's less obvious to people. And we had a campaign recently where a victim told her story about how she was in a coercive relationship and the signs to look out for. And we put that available across the social media channels, across our website, and advertising across parts of Derbyshire. It is harder for people to spot, which is why we're trying to raise that awareness of those offences. And we recently launched our campaign called Who is in Control? And if you link to social media platforms or our websites, you'll be able to see this. And again, that is around increasing awareness of those suffering domestic abuse or those perpetrating it, others, friends, family, because other people can report these things as well,
yes.
Which quite often we do get third-party reporting. We also do some schools inputs as well, which are delivered by the neighbourhood policing teams to a younger audience. And that, again, it's around how people can identify the early signs of coercive relationships, even, at a younger age. And then finally, we do publish court results for violence against women and girls offences, again, to give people confidence that, it may be a long journey to get to an outcome, but we're supporting people all the way. Victim services are supporting people all the way, but, so that they know that we can get to that positive outcome, and also so that perpetrators can see what actually can happen.
Mm. When you were talking just then, you reminded me of Clare's Law and actually just the importance of reporting, sharing intelligence, because it's really important that, laws like Clare's Law are something that we're talking about consistently, so that when men, women, whoever is in a relationship with a partner that may be abusive, maybe displaying coercive behavior, that they know they have that access to the police to get that information. But if we aren't reporting that information to the police or sharing that with the relevant partners, it's not known. Exactly. And actually you can save a life just by making sure that whatever's that may have happened to yourself as a survivor has been shared.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have got residents now who wanted to discuss and ask questions around knife crime. Our first question from Amber Valley: what plans are there to change the way officers patrol the streets, and how can stop and search be introduced to tackle knife crime and drug crimes across Derbyshire? What can be done to improve sentences for people carrying knives to ensure maximum punishments given for anyone found to be carrying a knife?
Okay, so just to give some reassurance, really, we have seen an increase in stop search over the last year. The stop search being a proactive tool and a preventative tool for policing. We've seen 28% more, 730 more from January to January. So a good increase of that. And actually we have a good find rate, if you like, for the purposes of the search to find something under a number of different circumstances. So a bit of reassurance that we are using it. We're using it proactively and we're encouraging more proactive use of it. Police officers have the power to search someone if they have reasonable grounds to suspect that an individual may be carrying a weapon, or a weapon in this instance where we're talking about knife crime and violence. And it is something that we use to target individuals or in terms of where we have grounds or where we have activities, I should say, rather than targeting individuals, where we have increases in crime, increases in the type of crime, there is a tool available to us for prevention. So we'll go back to something you said earlier, really, was it's really important if people tell us if there's information around, they've got concerns about weapons or activities happening, because then that helps us focus our activity and helps us focus our proactive patrols. I would always encourage people to do it. But there's other bits that come with it too, in terms of just to give some reassurance about tackling knife crime. We have a fortnightly partnership serious violence tasking group where with our partners we go through what intelligence there is in terms of violence and knife crime to look at what we need to do together, because certainly for some young people it can be the start of being drawn into criminal activity and there could be pressure to carry a knife. Or they may feel they need to carry a knife for safety. So all sorts of things that we would want to work with partners to help them in terms of change that behaviour and not put themselves at risk. We obviously need to understand that context, but we also understand the fear that people have of knife crime, which is why we're always very proactive each year in terms of knife crime operations. We help do knife sweeps with partners. We do all sorts of educational activities. And I go back to what I said earlier, to prevent people carrying a knife, to prevent that knife crime in the first place. It's something that all of the neighbourhoods focus on throughout the year, but particularly when we run those campaigns. And also, for this resident in particular, we've got a youth engagement team in Erewash, which we've found has been really instrumental in terms of reducing ASB and associated activity through education and early intervention. All of which I keep coming back to, we need to do all of this with partners for the prevention. We can do some of it, we can do the hard edge part of it, but we need others with us to try to prevent further activity or activities escalating.
So when they asked around I know this is challenging as well because we work with criminal justice partners. This isn't solely down to the police. So what can be done to improve sentences for people carrying knives to ensure maximum punishments are given? I know, chairing the Criminal Justice Board, how challenging that can be, because sometimes from the policing point of view, we've gathered the evidence, we've handed the case over to the CPS, and we do not get to choose what those sentences look like.
No.
But for that residents, I guess just clarification on sentencing and what powers the police do or don't have in that space to influence or not influence the outcome.
Absolutely. So our job is to put the best evidence before the court. It's for the court to decide what the sentencing outcome is. That's not within our jurisdiction. But, people should understand that we will do our best to get the best evidence that we can and present the best case with CPS. But the sentencing and what comes out of it, unfortunately, is out of our hands.
Okay. No, thank you for that. And in terms of, so we have another question from Derby City. In terms of information around knife crime and young people carrying knives, the question states, in light of recent information about knife-carrying youths not being taken seriously and various social services not sharing information properly and promptly, what steps are being taken to develop an information register for everyone capable of or showing obsession towards violence?
Okay, so as touched on earlier, we host a bi-weekly meeting for both our North and South Division. And we have representatives from each of the local policing areas with relevant partner agencies, local council, education and health. And we go through some of the issues that I've said in terms of knife crime and violence. We look at any intelligence or offences committed from juveniles involved in violence or carrying a knife, etc., relevant. And together we formulate a plan to help intervene or support or mitigate the risk that person poses or risk that is posed to them. We also have dedicated intelligence officers in relation to serious violence who assess all the information. We have, the person's talked about the ability to share information. We have information sharing agreements with trusted partners to enable us to do this so that there is shared space and a common understanding of the intelligence that we all have around a person so we can make the best decision. So there should be some reassurance around that. And then we try to use, as we said, the youth engagement team, but also the youth offending team, who, there are other routes than simply through into the criminal justice system when young people may have stepped down that path. We may, be able to find some of the resolutions that would mean that they no longer follow the path of knife crime or violent crime. And, I think that's something, again, we would all welcome. But I guess some of the concern may be, from this member of public in terms of, because I think they mentioned showing obsession towards violence.
Yes.
And certainly, that is something that we've seen in the media recently. And obviously, we're waiting to see what comes through in terms of from the Home Office around, is there a cohort of people who have this obsession with violence? What will be expected in the police, and what other agencies can do to try to get into that cohort to prevent that violence escalating?
And I know it goes on a bit further just to say whether the case goes to court or not. So the information sharing agreements that we have with partners is, I am assuming, but for clarification, is that whether that case goes to court or not. So if they're flagged as a vulnerable person, or there are safeguarding issues, or they are displaying obsessive behaviours, would we be partnership sharing, for example, with schools, teachers?
Yes, so often we have things reported to us from schools.
Okay.
Where, we take the information. So say a young person is identified around this, we would work with the school, we would work with local authority partners, we'd look with the information that we have, and everybody would have, if you like, all sit together and look at what we have around that individual, what the best routes and things would be to help that individual.
Okay. No, thank you for that. We have a few more questions on knife crime. Just two more from our residents. This one is from Chesterfield. We've heard about all the work that's going into tackling knife crime, but the question was simply, what are you doing to tackle knife crime in Derbyshire?
Okay, so I've obviously covered quite a lot around this already, and forgive me if I've mentioned this before, but we do a lot of intervention in schools and inputs in schools. So using the youth engagement teams to talk to young people about the risk of violence and the risk of carrying knives as well. The work goes on throughout the year, and those information sharing meetings that I just talked about. If there's an area or a school that's flagged as having an increased hotspot for serious violence, the local schools extra attention through the youth engagement teams, so extra support, extra things in there so that we can work with partners to do it. We also do test purchasing operations. So I know a lot of concern is often around the availability of knives and the ability to buy knives. So we work with trading standards colleagues. And we go into shops to see whether or not they are selling knives to people who are under 18. But we also do a lot in terms of educating them around not selling knives and prohibited articles to those who might be appearing underage. So again, it's all the prevention, but also checking if that prevention is actually working,
Yes.
to prevent the sale in the first place. There is further information available in terms of the response around what we're doing with knife crime and serious violence, which is obviously in that report, the performance assurance meeting report that we've given in support that outlines a lot more depth what we're doing around knife crime. But as Michelle said before, we're very happy that we've got a rollover the funding for the Violence Reduction Unit. We've been in many ways fortunate in Derbyshire that we didn't hit sufficient numbers to get that additional funding in the first place with some of the other forces. But we do recognise it is a concern, as is seen by the public questions, So, we'll continue to work with the Violence Reduction Unit and with partnership in order to try to reduce that behaviour, reduce that offending and reduce that risk for our communities.
Okay. Our last question is, when will the police start stop and searches for under 21s to mitigate knife crime?
So, as I outlined earlier, we stop search. It's not simply for under 21s, it's for all ages. And as outlined earlier, we've seen an increase in stop search. We're continually trying to improve our proactivity in terms of using it, recognising the prevention benefit that it can have. There is no under 21 can use or can't use. I'm not quite sure where that comes from, but just to give some reassurance, we're doing more stop search than ever and proactively trying to use it and to target in the right way to combat the threats and risks and the biggest concerns within our communities.
So for just clarification, there is no age restriction?
No, but obviously you get to the point in terms of above the age of 10, is age of criminal responsibility.
Okay. No, thank you for that clarification, and thank you very much for answering the questions that were presented to us by the public. So whilst we've heard the challenges and the opportunities for us to do more, to work differently, we look at a national picture, a global picture, especially around violence against women and girls, that is stark. But we can see that there is work being done across the constabulary in our city and county to reduce the figures and to tackle violence against women and girls. And when we look at serious violence as well, in our county, we've seen a reduction too. So that's positive for myself and hopefully positive for the residents. There's a real recognition that we can't be complacent, that we'll continue to do everything that we can, recognizing that partnership working is key. Everything can't sit solely with the police, working together with parents, with schools, with healthcare, with businesses, all the relevant partners to ensure that we make Derbyshire safer and stronger. And it's really a together effort. It means we all have to come together. But there is a lot around this report that is detailed on my website. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining us to answer the public questions. For the members of the public that haven't had a chance to read the detailed report, please go on the website. That was part 1 of our public assurance meeting. And you've joined us for part 2, and hopefully you'll join us for the next public assurance meeting, which will be held shortly. That one will be on drug dealing and substance misuse and what we're doing here at the constabulary to ensure we're keeping our residents safe on that priority that you've set for us. So thank you.